Do you ever wonder what would happen if a world-famous collector got caught keeping something that should have been known by everyone? Would they go to jail, or would people chase them? And what if that person was already dead? Get ready to learn what happened to Frank Fritz after he died, especially after Thea opened his garage and found something that shouldn't even be real. Frank Fritz. Frank Fritz built his job on looking for exciting things. He became famous as the co-host of American Pickers, a History Channel show that started in 2010 and quickly became really popular. Along with Mike Swolf, Frank traveled across the United States, looking through hidden treasures like barns, garages, and forgotten places, looking for old things and collectibles. Mike liked motorcycles and signs more, and Frank loved old toys, oil cans, gas station stuff, and classic cars. His deep knowledge and real love for old things made him a fan favorite. After he became successful, he continued buying and selling old things, and finally opened his own business called Frank Fritz Finds in Iowa. Over the years, he became known not just as a picker, but as someone who saved old things. He was seen as someone who saw value in what others threw in the trash. But after working on the show for so many years, he quit all of a sudden. And it was said that the reason was his health problems in 2020. But was that really true? And do you wonder what happened in all those missing years when he disappeared from Thupelkai? Did you ever wonder what happens to someone after the camera stopped filming? Especially someone like Frank Fritz, who made money finding the hidden past. He was one of the most well-known faces on American television. But then without warning, he disappeared. No interviews, no statements, not even a proper goodbye. Fans were left with questions, and the only answer was that he was sick. And then years later, after his death, they opened his garage. And suddenly, none of it felt like an accident anymore. Frank Fritz's story didn't end when he left American Pickers in 2020. Actually, that's when the real mystery started. Officially, it was reported that he left because of back surgery. But people who knew him thought something else was going on. According to them, Frank was not just sick. He was hiding from the world, slowly, carefully, and maybe for a reason. His former co-host, Mike Wolf, kept growing the brand. Frank, on the other hand, disappeared from spotlight completely. Not even fans who had followed him for years knew where he was or what he was doing. BIM 2022, the news finally came out that Frank had had a really bad stroke. He was found unconscious in his home. But even that wasn't the whole story. What made people go crazy was the fact that after his stroke, the court quickly chose someone to take care of his things. It's a legal move that usually happens for people who are not just sick, but can't take care of their own lives. His stuff, including his home and the now famous garage, were right away put under strict protection. The question was, why is he under such heavy legal protection? Some say it was normal procedure. Others pointed out that no family member had stepped in. No one knew what was inside the garage. And those who had visited Frank in his final year said that the garage door hadn't opened in forever, not even two close friends. What was he hiding? And why? Local people in Iowa say that Frank stopped hanging out with people completely where he welcomed antique lovers with open arms. He now kept his property locked and abbreviated. One neighbor remembered hearing loud engine sounds at weird hours off night. Another said they saw a delivery truck arrive without license plates, taking a covered car straight into Frank's garage. And then there were rumors and stories about Frank buying a car at a secret estate auction in Michigan, near one of GM's oldest car storage places. An auction thought was never listed publicly. No records, no witnesses, except a few people who said Frank left that day with something hidden under a tarp and a look in his face that said he found more than just a collectible. Don't worry, we will get back to this in a while and uncover everything. After his stroke, Frank never spoke publicly again. He didn't post online, didn't even put out a statement to explain why he left the show that made him famous. Everyone was left with questions. Questions like, why was a court-chosen person assigned to protect his stuff so quickly? What were they trying to protect or stop from being found? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what did Frank mean when, according to reports, a handwritten note found in the garage simply said, "I left everything there"? Was it a goodbye letter, a confession, or a warning? All will be revealed later. The video? When the garage door finally rolled open and the light hit those abandoned machines for the first time in years, it became clear this wasn't just the collection of a passionate antique hunter. This was something else completely. There were cars in there that no one knew existed. Nine in particular that would go on to cause a huge controversy. But before we get to that, and before we talk about the car with no VIN or the brass tag that said, experimental usingly, and the car that even experts couldn't explain, you have to understand one thing about Frank Fritz. He didn't just collect for fun. He collected with a purpose. And that purpose may have been to protect something the world was never meant to see or never deserved to see. You need to know that. Frank Fritz wasn't just collecting to decorate his house. He was chasing stories that had been forgotten. And that's where the mystery gets deeper. Because even when y'all take away the internet rumors, they're all facts of what Frank actually owned to raise more questions than they ends. So, let's talk about a few machines that were in Frank's secret garage. Take the 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, a car that's already famous on its own. Frank didn't just own one, he fixed it with careful attention. That car wasn't just a trophy, it was a time machine. Next up is the 1967 Ford Fairlane GT 390. He bought this boaty for around $7,000 and spent over $4,000 fixing it up. Frank once said it was a beast that deserved to be heard again. Want to see another piece? It's the Cadillac Fleetwood that he supposedly bought with Mike Wolfe. That car was luxury one wheels, heavy, shiny, and built to glide like a ghost. This all was normal, so let's go over the controversial pieces he owned. Frank had two incredibly rare 1954 Nash Healey sports cars in his collection, cars that mixed British frames with American power and Italian styling. He paid a combined $46,000 for it. And here's the shocking part. One of those cars had no public record of ever being shown or registered under his name. How do you hide a car like that? And was that the only hidden car he owned? Remember this question? Because it's going to blow your mind at the end of the video. Frank was also one of the only private owners in Iowa known to have a 1914 motorcycle car. It was a three-wheeled old car that looked like it belonged in a steampunk movie. It was worth over $35. As you know, cars like these aren't just picked up, they're hunted. And let's say that Frank was one of the best hunters with enough reputation, money, and gut feeling to find them before anyone else even knew they were for sale. Even his close friends didn't know the fullest. One former friend said, "Frank never bragged. But I always got the feeling he had something stored away that he didn't want the cameras to see." You might be wondering why hide part of your collection, especially when you're famous for sharing that passion with the world. That secrecy became even more suspicious after his stroke in 22 to the hospital stays. The legal fight over his care and the conservatorship made headlines. Both done inside the legal papers were mentions of personal property of unknown values stored in multiple locations. That triggered a court-supervised inquiry, especially focused on his garage. This wasn't just standard procedure, it was a red flag. If Frank's belongings were so well documented, then there'd be no need for such a detailed forensic inventory. But something about that garage required extra attention. Even the court ordered a temporary seal off his property to prevent messing with or theft. Why would the court go to that length for just a few old cars and gas station signs? Some who knew Frank say his collecting habits had changed in Thefenol years. He was no longer interested in sharing finds or selling them for a profit. Instead, he became more private, more protective. He had reportedly turned down several offers from museums and auto shows to display parts of his collection. And then there's the fact that no one, not even his co-host, Mike Wolf, had been inside the garage for years. In interviews, Mike confirmed the two had lost contact and had spoken for some time before Frank's stroke. Friends said the same. Frank had gone completely off the grid. You guys must be dying of curiosity, and it's completely understandable. Because if Frank was that much of an antiquenter, why didn't we ever see his own collection? The answer is simple. Frank's garage was never shown on TV. Fans knew about his collection, like the old motorcycles, antique signs, and, of course, classic cars. But no one knew just how deep it went. That wasn't by accident. Frank purposely didn't show off his possessions the way others in his industry often did. While his former co-host, Mike Wolf, started opening stores and building a public empire, Frank quietly avoided the spotlight. Some called it the fallout from the show. Others said it was due to his failing health. But what if the real reason was that? He found something so precious they couldn't risk it becoming public. Or had something he couldn't talk about. Something parked behind a locked garage door in Iowa. Hidden under a tarp, waiting for the right moment to be discovered. It wasn't until after his death that the mystery truly began to unravel. Frank died without any children or spouse. And the legal handling of his estate fell into the hands of court-chosen representatives. That meant that there would be a full inventory of everything he left behind. When officials arrived at the property, they expected to find some valuable antiques, maybe a few rare cars, but nothing prepared them for what they actually discovered. The garage that wasn't touched for years was sealed under layers of dust and time. The door was stiff like it hadn't been opened in over a decade. And when it finally rolled up, and what they found incident, it up shocking the vintage car community. It all started when they pulled up the garage door. They expected cars like the famous 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, the 1967 Ford Fairlawn GT he had restored, and even the Cadillac Fleetwood he bought with Mike Wolf years earlier. These were the cars people knew about. Some had even appeared briefly on social media or been mentioned in old interviews. According to various sources, there was one car that no one recognized. Not friends, not family, not even hardcore fans who had tracked Frank's collection for years. Covered in a stained gray tarp, parked awkwardly across the back wall. It was clear this car was not meant to be seen. Its shape was off. It was too low to the ground while being sleek, but with proportions that didn't match any known production model. Thestery said that when the tarp was pulled back by the expert, there was nothing but silence in the room. This thing looked like a Corvette, but not like any Corvette anyone had ever seen. The lines were too sharp. The curves were too aggressive. The body felt like a concept car, not something that was ever meant for public roads. The most bizarre thing was that there was no VIN identification number in the typical locations. Instead, there was a small brass tag that simply read "Experimental Loose Only." That's when the guessing started. Was this a custom job, a master copy, or could it be something more, a prototype that somehow slipped through the cracks of car history? Some claimed it looked like the legendary Corvette Grand Sport, which was a racing car developed secretly by GM in the 1960s. Before being shut down due to corporate racing bans, only 5 were ever officially made. All 5 are accounted for and locked behind museum glass or owned by elite collectors. So, what was this? Theory has been swirling online. Some believed Frank had gotten the car through a back-channel deal with a retired engineer. Others suggested he had found the car at an obscure estate sale in Michigan and paid cash to avoid Lavinga paper trail. But why keep it hidden? Why never mention it? Why, after decades of sharing his life and collection on national television, would Frank bury this car in the back of his garage, sealed off from the world? And then Thor was another mystery. What was that note? According to the reports, if we go into more details. The rumors and stories online stated that there was a tape to the back wall, just above his old workbench. It was a slip of yellow paper written. In Frank's handwriting, it said, "I left everything there." That said, there was no explanation, no tales, just that. Some dismissed it as a rumor, while some called it a farewell to the collection he loved so deeply. But others began to ask, was this rumor true? Or maybe it was a message, a breadcrumb meant for someone someday to follow. What does it mean to find something that's not supposed to exist? More importantly, what does it mean when man who found it chose never to tell anyone? Was Frank protecting a secret, or was he hiding a lie? Could this car truly be a missing piece of car history? Or was it the most elaborate hoax created by internet rumors? Now that the garage had barely been open for a little time, rumors were already spreading like wildfire. Word leaked out almost immediately. A car had been found in Frank Fritz's Corvette collection, one that didn't match any known model, had no registration, and carried a tag that said experimental use only. There weren't any photos, but that only fueled people's imagination. In this day and age of AI, people started making their own versions and posting them online, claiming that these are the real pictures of that car. So even if the real picture is out there, it's going to be pretty hard to tell the difference between the truth and reality. But don't worry, because we will give you the final call in this video, tell you the truth. What was it? Was it real? And why had Frank, a man known for sharing even the smallest finds with fans on American Pickers, never once mentioned it? As the initial shock wore off, the investigation kicked in. The estate handlers brought in classic car appraisers and forensic car experts to evaluate the find. Most expected it to be a high-end copy, maybe a tribute car, a clever mashup of vintage GM designs. When they started inspecting the frame, the materials, the welds, everything pointed to something far more disturbing. This wasn't backyard craftsman's. This was factory-level work, but not from any known factory. According to their reports, the body was unmistakably Corvette-like with styling that weighs extremely similar to the legendary 1963 Grand Sport. But the proportions were off. The rear fenders flared too wide. The front had an unusually deep scoop. The roofline didn't quite match anything in GM's records. This experimental design was, however, undeniably familiar to those who had studied the history of Chevrolet's division in the 1960s. And here's where the controversy ext back in the early 1960s. Zora Arkostanov, the godfather of the Corvette, had quietly started the Grand Sport program, an attempt to build a lightweight, race-dominating version of the Corvette that could take on the Shelby Cobra. The project was shut down almost as quickly as it began, supposedly after only 5 cars were built. Rumor continued for decades that a few more prototypes were produced in secret, some for testing, some smuggled out by rogue engineers, and at least one that supposedly vanished during a cross-country shipment. GM has always denied this, of course. Publicly, the company insists that only 5 Grand Sports exist, but insiders have told a different story for years. According to a friend of Frank's, he had also mentioned attending an estate auction in Flint, Michigan, the original home of General Motors. The auction was in public. Frank had heard about it through a tip from an old motorcycle contact. Supposedly, he returned from that trip with something big, something he didn't even want to show his closest friends. When asked about it, Frank reported lie brushed it off, saying it's older than it looks. I'm still figuring it out. At the time, no one thought much of it. Frank was known for being vociferous. But now, in light of what was found, those vague comments seemed meaningful. Then another secret was revealed to the public via the internet. There was an old Polaroidoscope inside a drawer in Thegridge's workbench. It showed Frank standing next to the mystery car years younger, holding what looked like a folded blueprint, or technical diagram. The car in the photo was only partially restored, its bodywork unfinished. Naturally, once this all came to light, Corvette forums, car historians, and conspiracy theorists lit up. Some argued the car was a sophisticated copy built by a private coach builder using gold GM molds. Others insisted it had Taube, one of the long-rumored test cars, prototypes that GM denied ever existed. A few skeptics claimed that the whole thing was a hoax, played by Frank himself as one final mystery to stir Thabit after his death. But there was one thing no one could explain. Why would hide it? And how would it benefit him after his death? It was not like he had any friends or lovers he had left beat. One theory suggested that Frank may have signed a non-disclosure agreement when he got the car. Perhaps the person who sold it to him didn't want it traced. Or maybe Frank feared the legal consequences if it was traced back to GM. After all, if Thacker was never officially released, he technically wasn't supposed to have it. So, now let's cut to the chase and dunk over the truth. Frank Fritz did have an impressive collection of classic car sand antiques documented and valued by courts after his stroke. The Bel Air, Lane GT, even the Cadillac Fleetwood. Those were all real, confirmed, and verified. The Nash Healy's also real, rare, expensive, and totally under the radar. But the mysterious Corvette with no VIN and the brass tag reading, experimental use only. That's where fact starts to blur. There were no credible photos, no official paperwork, and no museum or collector has verified such a car ever being in Frank's possession. The Polaroid note on the garage wall, the secrecy in Michigan. All of that is unverified. It has been concluded, after a lot of research, that these stories gain momentum in online forums, but remain censored by hard evidence.